Hi, welcome back to the Healing Conversation. This is our fourth session together. When I first put the the curriculum together, when we designed this 2 months ago, I thought, well, I got this. The first session we'll do an introduction, sort of lay out the context for the healing conversation. And the second session, we went deeper into the questions of the healing conversation. And last time when we were together on New Year's Eve, I talked about how the healing conversation applied in my own life, in my own healing journey. And I think I've been taking this one session at a time as I've been preparing and feeling into what's right in the moment. And I have to tell you, when I looked at the topic for tonight 2 weeks ago, really got invested in what we were going to be talking about, I freaked out a little bit. Healing supremacy is a tall order. It's a big conversation to have. And of course, the events of this past week have made that even more relevant. So it is my sincere hope and prayer that I'm able to deliver some insight, some wisdom, some hope about what we're going through, and maybe even offer up some new questions for us to ask about this time and space that we're in. I thought before we get started, I wanted to spend a little bit of time with our Morpho butterfly. When I first shared with you in the last session about the app, the Be Love app that was part of a download that came to me in 2019, and it was all about this need to find a middle ground, a higher ground, a place where we could come together in our differences to remember that we're here to love each other, just to take a breath with each other. And everywhere I look right now, everybody's taken really big, deep breaths. This has been a week of deep breaths, just to keep ourselves grounded and whole. And so I thought we'd start tonight with a minute of deep breaths. So if you'll join me. And what we're breathing is the remembrance of who we are. That sacred knowing that we are here to love and be loved, and everything else is just an imagination gone wild into the darkness of our soul, the trauma of our story, and the woundedness that each of us carries forward. So let's just take a breath and release that grief, that sorrow, that sadness. Take a breath for everyone who doesn't have the moment to take a breath right now. And take that breath deep down into your belly, that you fill yourself with the energy that is there always for us. Grace is always present. It never leaves us. And it's in those moments where we get really still and quiet that we find the grace, even in the chaos of the moment. So tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about that chaos, healing supremacy. And when you really peel back the layers of the onion on supremacy, you get down to the core that it is, at its very core, separation. The idea that I am more than you or you are more than me, from any lens of perception you want to apply, whether that's skin color or gender or race or ethnicity or country of origin or allegiance to an ideology, wherever we find ourselves feeling superior, we have lost track of our oneness. We've lost track of the truth that we are all here from the same source code. We have the same light source within us. And the rest is just an expression and a navigation of uniqueness and differences and diversity. And so I want to start with that as our opening premise, that we are here to learn to love and be loved, and that supremacy is an impediment to that because it creates separation between you and I. And so we're gonna We're going to go deeper on this and unpack it. I came across this quote this week, and it really stood out for me. The system that we live in seems to perpetuate ignorance more and more as we go forward. So we have to really take a stand and say it's time for us to understand how the vehicle operates, what I'm doing here, how I got here, what my purpose is, and how I can leave and or come back and move on when I wish. And that's really the goal of the spiritual path, or if you will, sort of that reconnection with the oneness. Not to just have a sharper mind, a better intellect, or better memory. These things aren't even important. What is important is to understand the vehicle, the energy, the process, so that we can utilize this to experience the most fulfilling life possible. That is the depth of the path itself. That is how we should look at it. Last time I talked about that we're made to go deep. It's in our nature, in our psyche, in the way that we are constructed in this human form to ask the bigger questions, to come with that innate curiosity. And more than ever, and especially when it comes to the topic of separation and supremacy and the amount of suffering that we're witnessing and will probably see accelerate in the coming months. We need to be asking different questions about this moment, not who's right, who's wrong, who's got all the answers, who has none of the answers. We need to be asking different questions. And so I want to start again by resetting the context for the healing conversation. There are 5 pattern-interrupting questions that shift and dance with time, but they keep coming back to sort of the same essence. And question number 1 is, are you ready for the healing conversation? And what we're going through right now across the United States and across the world is making this question probably more relevant than ever. What does ready look like? How much more do we have to go down the rabbit hole of suffering and separation before we really open up to that readiness? Question number 2 is, what would we have to believe about each other to live in harmony? If you remember, that question has kind of a 2-part angle to it. The first way I began to ask that question is, do you believe we can live in harmony? But person after person would say, yes, but ... And the ... is question number 3. Question number 3 is, are you willing to fact check your fears or your bias? And as it turns out, they are the same thing. Bias stands for believe it as so. And so tonight, a lot of the work that we're going to be doing on this topic of supremacy is looking at our biases. Where have our believe it as so's gotten in the way of our oneness, our connectedness, our recognition that your suffering is my suffering, your joy is my joy? Somebody I had a conversation with early in the week who believes different things, has a different believe it as so than I do about what's happening right now. And it was interesting because she presented to me her version of the facts. And I kept listening and listening, and underneath all of it were fears. That she was grabbing the facts that reinforced her fears rather than looking for the truth that would unlock the fears. And so this is a hard movement for us to step into, but it's one that we can't put off any longer. I've never felt more urgency for us to show up without agenda, without ego, and without fear. And you know, a lot of people are becoming more and more aware of plant medicines and their role in the healing conversation that we're having across the planet. And the primary benefit of these plant medicines is fear and ego fall away. For a short time, we step into a place where all of the construct of fear is relieved, and we can begin to experience each other without that edge, that fear-based reaction that we have to the world around us. And so tonight we'll talk a little bit more again about plant medicines and their role in helping us overcome some of those fears. Question number 4 cannot really be answered until we get clear about question number 3, because we often have believe it as so's that get in the way of loving ourselves. Those biases that we hold against our own well-being come to the surface pretty quickly when we get to question number 4, which is, do we love ourselves enough to heal? That is on the table as well in what's happening in this country right now. Are we willing to set aside our believe it as so's long enough to explore the potentiality of what a healed existence would look like? So I want to bring that energy into this conversation. And then what is your role in the healing conversation? Each of us is tasked with coming to this earth to fully express, to find within the human experience our secret sauce, the thing that lights us up, that brings us fully into our wholeness, our embodiment of the light that we carry as spirits on this planet. And tonight I want to offer in a bonus question, and that is, what is our tolerance for collective grief? Because we're about to find out. We are about to get to that question on an existential level as we see more grief and trauma showing itself in the streets, more strife and division becoming weaponized in ways that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime in the United States of America, and yet here we are. And I know it's not unique to America. Every corner of the world is waking up to this disparity between who we are as divine beings and how we're showing up on this human plane. That dissonance, that distance is becoming intolerable. And it's creating tremendous grief and suffering on the human scale that I think today we hit 20 million people have COVID now. And I think 2 million people have died total. I just saw that number come through this afternoon. That 2 million people. I mean, we are approaching a scale of grief, shared grief, that in our lifetime, our generation, we've never experienced before. And so this is, what is our tolerance for this shared grief? How much longer are we willing to seek to make each other wrong rather than find the place that brings us to the right way with each other? So when we know the answer to that question, what is our tolerance for collective grief, then we will be ready for the healing conversation. I introduced these maps in session 1. I revisited them in 2 and 3, and tonight I'll do the same, but at a much higher level, just recognizing that to move from a construct of fear to one of love isn't something that just happens by accident. It is a deliberate quest that each of us enters into on our own personal journeys. And now what's being asked of us is that we enter into it collectively. That consenting to the human experience, that point at which you decide you are fully responsible for everything that happens in your life. Not how it happens to you, but how you respond to it. And this is a moment where we have to shift out of reactionary mode into being consciously responsive to all of the inputs that are coming at us. So the properties of love are a mindset that lines up with our biology of love. We are reaching that point where our bodies are in such a state of unease and dis-ease. That's why we're taking a breath several times a day, watching the news, taking more breaths, going to the store, taking more breaths, getting our work done, taking more breaths. We are breathing our way through this every minute of the day right now. And so I just want to make that sort of transparent in this conversation is we're in the hardest labor of the human story right now. This is the point where the breathing is going to become mandatory. I think about having 4 babies at home and how important breath work is to that movement of birthing something. And that's what we're in right now, that middle ground between who we were and where we're going. John Wayne, tonight you were just saying you feel like we're in this pause, like this holding pattern, this quiet before the storm, or the darkest before the dawn. You could throw any number of metaphors into the conversation here, and they probably all fit. This is a moment where we are sort of in a limbo about how are we going to move past this? Are we going to come out changed for the better? Or are we going to continue down the path of mutual destruction that we've been on, that is finally coming to a culmination? And sadly, there will probably have to be more bloodshed and more dissension and more division before we are broken-hearted enough to open our hearts to each other. Now, we don't have to all get broken in this process. There are going to be those that will resist shifting to a higher plane of existence with each other, and then there will be those that will be part of the midwifery team to bring it forward. And that's what I feel like I'm part of. I'm part of the let's breathe together. Let's get through this. It's going to be hard. It's going to be messy, but we can do this. We are wired for our divine expression. We don't yet quite know how to get there, but we will. I introduced this map of the mindset, skill set, tool set. The mindset being our big toe, the paradigm from which we operate. The big toe is the culmination of all the beliefs and experiences and your interpretation of those experiences and how you then carry that as your lens of perception in the world. The skill set is baked into us. It's curiosity. It's how do we do something different, better, more, longer, shorter, all the ways that the mind likes to move and create. It's our co-creative ability, our divine creative ability that comes through in that curiosity. And then the tool set are the flow states. This is where we, as I said before, plant medicines are one of the tools. Meditation, yoga, being in nature, just sitting quietly, contemplating, opening ourselves up to something other than the monkey mind that wants to keep us looping through the same fear and ego and all the things that get in the way of us moving to this place where we recognize that harmony is our natural state. It's not something we have to achieve. It's the removal of all the impediments to harmony that we're focused on now. And supremacy is an impediment to harmony. Harmony is where we come together and we merge in this beautiful balance of expression. Supremacy, by its very nature, says my expression's more valid, more appropriate, better, however, whatever word you want to attach. It's different. And in that differencing, we create this otherness with the world around us. I want to remind you of this map, the idea that the world is just a bunch of people performing a bunch of processes, and processes include living, food, shelter, clothing, commerce, health, education, all the ways that we exist on this planet. And if the mindset that we're carrying in is one of fear, then the output is a diminishment of our potentiality on this planet. If the mindset is one of love, then we create a very different outcome for ourselves. I introduced this map last time, the language of shift. And I found myself right in the middle of all 3 levels this week, watching the numb shit and dumb shit, people who are doing things that betray their own best interest. We saw a lot of oh shit, a lot of people really having life happen in a really scary way, people who were subject to those doing dumb shit and numb shit. And then if you step way back and really just allow the whole scene to play out and not be hooked and emotionally hijacked by it, you could see that this is a transformational moment. This is holy shit that we're going through, where we're really going to have to ask ourselves the bigger question is, how, as I pointed out, the bonus question, how much more grief can we tolerate before we're willing to say enough? Where we're willing to say it doesn't matter. Not that there isn't accountability, that's still a piece of the healing process, but making each other wrong isn't going to get us to where we want to go. So I saw a lot of language of shift flying around this week. I also got to thinking about this map. And remember, we're solving for X, and X is love, not a particular destination, not a particular way of being, but a way of being with each other, a way of being with ourselves. And so this is, you know, we're born into separation. At the very moment that we take our first breath, we're no longer part of just the spirit world. We've entered a physical realm. And now we're on this path to figure out how do we come together in this physical plane to recreate the unity field of love in a physical world. How do we do that? And boundaries are a big piece of that. And so healing supremacy is the dance of boundaries. Where do I end and you begin? Where do your beliefs end and mine begin? Where do we get to dance in each other's world without imposing on each other's world? And so tonight I want to just take us through kind of a tour of supremacy. There are people who are experts in supremacy when it comes to race, supremacy when it comes to religion, supremacy when it comes to gender expression. Everybody, they're experts who have unpacked these areas in finer detail than I will tonight. And that's good, because there are those that have already mapped the way out. There's a beautiful woman, her name is Jane Elliott, who I just have deep respect for. And she has an exercise she does with people in a large auditorium, and it's on YouTube. You'll find her. And she asks every white person in the room if they'd be willing to trade places with a black person and to please raise their hand, to have the experience of being a black person in America. And nobody raises their hand. And of course, she's done this enough times, she can pretty much predict that that's the outcome. And her point is, you know it's wrong. What are you willing to do about it? So there's help out there. Black Lives Matter has, this whole movement has brought this conversation front and center. We're learning about our history through a whole new lens of reveal that we didn't even, there's so many things I did not know about, I was not taught about in our history about the United States. And so tonight I'm not going to go into the depth and detail about how we got to where we are, but I want to get back to the source code, because that's where you remove the malware of fear, is at the code level, not at the expression level. So we're going to talk about the state of supremacy, where we are right now, the source of it, where does it come from, some symptoms of it, and then some solutions for it. I love this quote by Carl Jung. He said, "One doesn't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And so what we're doing right now is we're shadow dancing. This shadow dancing is a term used to describe the inelegant, painful exploration of our wounding. And we have a lot of collective wounding. There's, it doesn't take a lot of research to figure out that our parents grew up in a time of war, and thinking about, the Bay of Pigs. My father was in the Korean War. We had, world wars. We had a civil war. We've been at war for thousands of years. We have been killing each other for thousands of years. We have a lot of shadow to dance with, and that fear-based construct, the very idea that we need to kill somebody for any reason makes no sense when you stand back and think about the big picture, the human story. And yet we have managed to find reasons to kill each other, to justify man's inhumanity to man. I'm reading a book right now about actually a local family, and it's The Quest for Eternal Sunshine, and it's about a gentleman who was in a Nazi concentration camp, and he's telling his story about, how long it took him to come out of the shadow of that experience. And he spent his whole life unpacking that trauma from his story. We do that work individually in therapy, in medicine circles, in the quietude of our own existence. We seek to find the light in our own shadow, and now we have to consent to that collectively, or we will continue down this path of mutual destruction. We will continue to feed into a suicide pact. That became so evident to me this week, that we are so far from a conversation to navigate our way through this. Now we've resorted to violence and projection. And so all of that is part of the curse of certainty, that we have surrendered to this idea that the only way through this separation, this pain that we're experiencing on a human scale, is to go after each other. And I would offer that there's more waiting for us, that instead of shadow dancing, we're moving to a place of fire, of shadow dancing to fire dancing, to re-engage with that eternal flame that burns brightly within each of us, our pure potentiality to rise above our unconsciousness of the past, to move into this realm of reconciliation and reunion and communion with each other. Just this week, you and I are doing our very best to stay a distance from each other for all the right reasons, and yet there is such an ache to just to sit with each other. And so we snuck a little connection time. We went not face to face with each other for a hug, but back to back with each other, the back of our, and just letting our spines just have a little bit of communion felt really wonderful the other day. We're hungry for reconnection. We're aching for it at this point. And at some point, and I don't know when it's going to be, but you'll know it in your own body, like we're going to feel this shift. The pain of not changing is going to become so unbearable that we will finally be ready to surrender to the shift, to finding that place where connection is the focus and not maintaining the distance with each other. Like right now, COVID is creating that distance, but we're just a few months away from being back in community with each other. Are we going to let this time make us better on the other end or worse? Are we going to learn the lesson, or are we going to continue to resist it? So again, I want to remind you that my big toe is this, that life happens for me, not to me. And from that perspective, I want to broaden out and offer that to the world, that life happens for us, not to us. That everything, even everything we're going through right now, climate change, the pandemic, the political cultural strife that we're in. All of this is a cauldron of exciting the wounds from our past to bring us forward to this place where we say, enough. Like, how much more can we take? How much more collective grief can we hold? I don't think that much more. We are at a boiling point. You can feel it. We've been sort of frog in the water, watching this thing sort of simmer and like, it can't be that bad. We aren't that far apart. We can come together, right? But now we're reaching this crescendo, this existential crescendo of awareness that, are we really going to let this thing accelerate to the point where we enter into a civil war? Or are we going to call ourselves back off the ledge? Are we going to pull ourselves back in? And so I think the only way we get to that shared agreement to approach this strife from a new perspective is if we understand the DNA level of where we are right now. So this is a new map I want to introduce tonight, and this came through in a download over the last 2 weeks, and I've been unpacking it, and I've had pieces of this come through before, but it came through in a much more complete picture here. So let's just sort of walk through the elements here. This idea of operating from a place of fear and scarcity animates in a very particular way, and when we see that animation result in the human condition, it looks a certain way. And so, for example, if we are coming from a place of fear and scarcity, which we are pretty much most of the time in this world right now, we see that from an internalization standpoint as a point of shame. Like, we will often feel like we're not good enough. I'm not good enough. And so that not good enough, where did we get that idea? I've never known a 2-year-old to stand up and say, I'm not good enough, right? That's a learned response to the world around us. And so we internalize that I'm not good enough and become shamed by it, and that creates separation and isolation. When we take that separation, that feeling of not good enough, and project it out into the world, we externalize it, then you're not good enough, right? And it's the same energy, but one's pushed in and one is expressed outward. And what's interesting about that is that creates that state of othering. Like, there's a beautiful quote by one of the great masters that says, what about the others? And they said, there are no others. The concept of other is foreign to our nature of oneness, and yet we are dying because of our othering of each other. And so if we come from a place of fear and scarcity, if that is the input, if that is the malware that has corrupted our human operating system that sources from love, we are shamed and blamed. And the patriarchy, that model of taking shame and blame and weaponizing it, gaming it, creating competition, creating survival around certain behaviors over others, creates the conditions for supremacy to thrive. And so I think what we've seen on display over the last few years and coming to a crescendo in more recent times, this idea of supremacy of ideology, that one idea is better than another, one approach is more true or righteous or holy than another. All of this is feeding into this idea of supremacy. And remember, supremacy is just separation, magnified. This unconsciousness to believe that we are in some way, shape, or form more worthy, more valuable, going to heaven, not going to heaven. I talked a little bit about my background in the church, being baptized Catholic, and then moving on to an evangelical Christian orientation in my teens, and then a Mormon orientation until I was about 35. And each of them had the absolute certainty that theirs was the only true church. Theirs was the one right way to get to the reward, right? The Catholics had an interesting view. Theirs is you're born a sinner, and it takes you your whole life to earn your way back into heaven. Mormons had a really, I like the flip on theirs. Theirs is you're born perfect and you got a whole lifetime to screw it up, right? So they looked at children and said, children are perfect. And so they have a beautiful orientation around family and children, and yet even within that orientation, there is the statement, we are the only one true church. And so when you start claiming truth and ownership of truth, you are now in the realm of supremacy. Telling somebody that is gay that they are not worthy is a statement of an ideological supremacy. It's not based in any reality. It's not based in any truth. Supremacy is an artifact of our imagination. It is an input from a broken world now manifesting in how we treat each other. And of course, from a community perspective, this creates unease, dis-ease with each other, and our immunity is reduced. One of when the virus first came around last year, I began to really understand that our immunity is tied to community, that our well-being is absolutely tied to how we honor our interdependency with each other, our communal well-being. Until we honor our communal well-being, our immune systems, because of the fear, are suppressed. So let's just look at what the reverse of that is. When we're coming from a place of love and abundance, we reclaim ourselves, and this is I'm love, right? I am lovable. I am love. And turns out you're love too. And as it turns out, we are all love. There's this, love and abundance model makes room for everybody. This is a big toe that fits into everybody's shoe, right? We're not asking people to take on something foreign to their physical biology. Our biology is love. That we are wired for love. So the opposite of supremacy is harmony. So let's go back to question number 2 of the healing conversation. Do you believe we could live in harmony? Right? And yes, but ... What would we have to believe about each other to live in harmony? And this is right here, this piece. The juxtaposition from harmony to supremacy comes down to what would we have to believe about each other for us to live in harmony? And so let me ask you guys, if you would just join in on this conversation a little bit, what comes to mind when I ask that question? What do we have to believe about each other to live in harmony?
That everyone else is doing the best that they can.
You pull the mic in a little bit, Mary.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That everyone else is doing the best that they can.
Yeah. Everybody's doing the best that they can with what they have. And that if they are behaving in a way that is hurtful to others, that it's out of ignorance or lack of ability to do it differently.
So we have to believe that everybody's doing the best they can, and when they act out, it's either out of ignorance or they're stressed.
It's defense.
It's defense.
It's defense, right.
Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
What else would we have to believe about each other? John Wayne, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's that they actually want. There's actually something deep down that they actually want it to work. And so there's an integrity of someone's desire versus just saying it, because words are words, but deep down we can actually feel things. And I think a lot of times within media, or, within the things that people say today, they don't always mean it. And so, as someone who is a big feeler, that's what I feel, and so that's what's true to me.
So we'd have to want it.
Yeah.
Oh, and you remember when I went to the RV parks and I asked people, do you believe we could live in harmony? And they'd say, I'd like to,
Mm-hmm.
but ... right?
Yeah.
All the reasons why I can't. That piece of I'd like to kept resonating for me. Like, I think there is a desire. There will be those that will be afraid to want to.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an underlying mistrust that goes back to our original wounds of not trusting the human experience, not trusting the people around us to offer up safety to us. And unless that pain from our wounding is addressed in a sacred healing way, we tend to project it out into the world, right? So what else would we have to believe about each other? That we want to, and that we're capable of it, right? What else, Mare?
Well, that we want to, that we're capable of it, that it's entirely possible.
That's the one right there, that it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
See, I think it is a failure of imagination right now that keeps us locked into this intractable polarization that we're in. It feels like people not only are struggling with wanting to, but I think the want to is really just, at its core, not trusting that it's possible.
Right. Well, there's evidence all around us that would really back that up if we were operating from that position of fear around it. So it's a pretty easy thing to look at the world and say, yes, I'd love to, but look at all these assholes.
Right.
Pardon my language, but it makes it very difficult when you look at things like what's been going on this week, what's been going on for the last 4 years, but particularly what's coming to a head right now.
Mm-hmm.
You look at where those folks are coming from, and it seems like an intractable gap.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to grab all of that evidence and say, well, I'd really sure like to. Gosh.
And we almost have gotten to the point where our mistrust of the potentiality of healing is baked into our curse of certainty.
Mm-hmm.
It has become part of our big toe. Our theory of everything is that because I believe I have the right answer for how life should be lived, and you and I don't agree, it almost is self-reinforcing at this point. So, I mean, we've really gotten ourselves into a bit of a mess here.
Mm-hmm.
And an easy way out doesn't seem evident. It feels that intractability is beyond repair at this point. And yet, our bodies are wired for harmony. Our bodies like to be at ease. We perform better. We feel better. We experience life through a more pleasing lens when we are coming from a place of harmony. So that dissonance of we are harmonious beings by nature, and yet we have created a construct that makes harmony seem impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's coming to the surface right now. Is it feels like harmony is impossible. That's what I note when I look around the world right now.
The
Yes.
other thing that's interesting about that, though, is even with everyone who descended on the Capitol this week, why were they drawn into that grouping? For connection.
Say again?
I said, why? So everyone who descended on the Capitol this week, why were they drawn into that grouping of people? It's to connect
Yeah.
with others.
Yeah.
Right? So even from a really twisted, flipped on its head perspective, it's still the desire to connect with other humans.
Yeah. Yeah, we want to gather. We like to be with other people that believe the things that we believe. There's a fellowship in that process. But when all the beliefs are based in fear and not love, that fellowship becomes weaponized. And that's what we've been witnessing as of late. So I just thought this was an interesting way to sort of look at it, this idea of we're living in a world where blaming and shaming has become a weapon of choice for those that would seek to maintain supremacy. And yet that goes so much against our basic human nature to love and be loved and be in harmony with each other, that I just don't think we can exist in this level of dissonance much longer. And some will get there sooner than others, but this is what's on the table for us right now. So I want to introduce this, we'll go forward here. This idea here of how do we strip away all the ideologies, all the believe it is so's, all of the supremacy, all of the ways that we are feeding the separation rather than unpacking it. And so, if we think about and this comes from my experience with my pulmonary embolism and having hovered between life and death, my near-death experience made me feel like there was no separation between myself and others, that oneness was such a natural state of ease for me in that moment. It's like it reset me back to my original source code. A lot of times people will say on psychedelic experiences, they only experience oneness. That's the time when all of that fear and ego and defensiveness and dots go away, and we are able to just be with people. I've been with a lot of people when the first time they've done some kind of sacred medicines, and almost universally the response is, oh, is this what it feels like to feel normal? Is this what it feels like to feel good about being with other people? Because most of the time, a lot of us are walking around not sure, am I good enough? Do I fit in? Where do I fit in? How do I fit in? We have this constant inner critic and dialogue going with every interaction in the world, and that's a trauma response. That's a wounding now manifesting as an overreaction to the world around us, a cautionary action to the world around us. And so each of us coming into this physical realm gets a body. And what we're learning about the body, and one of the maps I showed you earlier, is we're coming online with not just our physical senses, but this whole new toolkit of expanded senses, of clairsentience, clairaudience, clairvoyance, intuitive knowing, astral projection. I mean, there are people that are doing some really cool, big, trippy stuff out there that I can't even put words to, because that's their story to tell, not mine. But we are learning more and more every day about this body of truth, this body of trust. Truth and trust are two words that belong in the same sentence always. This body of truth, this body of trust, has all kinds of codes that we're just now starting to begin to tap into and understand. And within that, we exist, and within the world, we have our big toe. So we have what we know from the inside out, and then what we take in from the outside in. So if we are well-boundaried and healed, these are containers. My body is a container. It's a sacred container. I can trust what comes from this body. My big toe is sourced in love, so I can trust it because it will always lead me to a better experience for myself if I'm sourcing my free will from love versus fear. So our big toe are our beliefs, and those beliefs can be religious, they can be philosophical, they can be a bias that is baked in fear. And so I love these, whenever I see these sort of memes come up about the primary teaching of every major religion, doesn't seem to matter, even though every one of them only is the right way. They all seem to have the same statement at their core, which is the golden rule that we understand the law of sacred reciprocity. It's baked into our body of truth that I don't want to hurt you or have you hurt me. Like, our bodies inform that sort of understanding that, we really don't want somebody to hurt us, and that if we don't hurt them and they don't hurt us, life is good. So what does sacred reciprocity look like? It allows for our diverse expression. It creates spaciousness for you to show up exactly as you are, John Wayne, exactly as your highest expression wants to express. And Meredith, the same for you. We are leaves on the same tree, each catching the light in a slightly different way, each with a different curve and a different bend, but all sourced from the same tree of life. Sacred reciprocity and the golden rule does not create suffering in another, right? Because we understand the reciprocity, the oneness that we are, and it's not sourced from fear. So fully expressing as a balance between individual expression and communal well-being is the target condition. That is solving for X. That is what love looks like manifested in a physical boundaried world, that I can trust you to do the right thing for me, and you can trust me to do the right thing for you. That's harmony. That's what we are shooting for here. And yet, religion, biases, the patriarchal sort of fear-based construct that we have accepted, that we've come to tolerate, and I'll use that word very specifically, tolerated, because it is not something we are comfortable with. It is something we've learned to tolerate. It's like a pebble in the shoe that you've just learned to walk with, right? You're uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable it stops you. But we are reaching a point where we have gravel in our shoes, and it's really time to look at where that discomfort lies. Why are we tolerating so much discomfort in our story? I want to share a little video with you. This is a bishop talking about his big toe, his version of the story when it comes to religion.
I don't think hell exists. I happen to believe in life after death, but I don't think it's got a thing to do with reward and punishment. Religion is always in the control business. And that's something people don't really understand. It's in the guilt-producing control business. And if you have heaven as a place where you're rewarded for your goodness and hell as a place where you're punished for your evil, then you sort of have control of the population. And so literally scared the hell out of a lot of people throughout Christian history. And it's part of a control tactic.
But wait a minute, you're saying that hell, the idea of a place under the earth or somewhere where you're tormented for an eternity, is actually an invention of the church?
I think the church fired its furnaces hotter than anybody else. But I think there's a sense in most religious life of reward and punishment in some form. The church doesn't like for people to grow up because you can't control grown-ups. That's why we talk about being born again. When you're born again, you're still a child. The people don't need to be born again. They need to grow up. They need to accept their responsibility for themselves and the world.
What do you make of the theology, which is quite prominent these days in America, which is that there is one guaranteed way not to go to hell, and that is to accept Jesus as your personal Savior?
Yeah, I grew up in that tradition. Every church I know claims that we are the true church, and they have some ultimate authority. We have the infallible Pope, we have the inerrant Bible. The idea that the truth of God can be bound in any human system, by any human creed, by any human book, is almost beyond imagination for me. I mean, God is not a Christian. God is not a Jew or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist. All of those are human systems which human beings have created to try to help us walk into the mystery of God.
So I'll just ask you, how did that land for you, John Wayne, with your religious background?
Yeah, I mean, it was, boom. I've seen clips of that. I've never seen that full clip before. And so, as I kind of take on this message of fear and love, I wonder what your opinion is of religion. Are you anti-religion? Is there a place for religion?
That's a good question. I've been challenged on that before. My background, obviously, I wasn't anti-religion for 35 years of my life. I was pretty steeped in it. I think the first few years after I left the church, I had an edge about religion. I felt like it was oppressive. I didn't have a lot of respect for the othering of people of the LGBTQ community. Certain churches have some pretty heavy biases about people of color that were a real challenge for me. But even when I could separate out the church's, sort of the dogma or the gospel from the actual behaviors of humans, like humans screw up and take what is a good thing and make it something not so good. Even when I could separate that out, I began to really understand that what I was mostly bothered by about the church was this concept that there was only one right way to live.
Yeah.
And I couldn't reconcile that. So no, I'm not anti-church. I'm anti-projection of certainty so much that we legislate or seek to legislate our beliefs into the lives of others. Like, you get to have your big toe. Religion is a big toe. It's a theory of everything. Because we don't know, how we got here or where we're going. All of it is a man-made construct. Just as the bishop was talking about, he was saying, hell is a concept. It's an idea. We don't have proof that there's a hell. We don't have proof that there's a heaven. For all we know, it's over when it's over. But the idea of heaven and hell is something that we can do something about right here and now. It's not after we die we figure this out. No, we're here to figure it out here and now, to create heaven on earth here. So part of the religious orientation informs my big toe, even still, in a really beautiful way, but it's a much more inclusive big toe now. There's no supremacy of ideology. There's no supremacy of thought. Like, your big toe, you want to sing and dance and chant and, that's cool. You want to go on a mountaintop and meditate for a month. That's your big toe. Somebody else wants to go to church every Sunday and take communion and sing gospel songs with their fellowship. That's a beautiful thing too. We each get to have our divine celebration of our understanding of something bigger than ourselves. Where I'm challenged is where we begin to want to force it onto others, to create a theocracy based on whose religion, right? Freedom of religion was one of the cornerstones, the cornerstone of the United States' initial sort of DNA. Like, they didn't like the oppression they were experiencing in Europe and came to the United States to have a different experience, a different big toe. And yet here we are 400 years later. And I heard a video this week of a guy saying, yeah, I felt the hand of God push me through the Capitol doors. Okay, brother. Wow. That's a certainty that's going to put you in jail, as it turns out, right? That level of certainty, that there's an entitlement that comes with that certainty, a righteousness, a self-righteousness that comes with that certainty, that is the antithesis of what I fell in love with in the church. And so I'm not anti-religion, but I am anti-projection of your beliefs onto another being.
And I think that's what he was saying within that speech, right? Because so many religions, they have the directive, right? It's this directive of, you as this belief need to go out and spread the word.
Right.
And if you do, you get more points.
Right.
Which will guarantee your life after death.
So
Fear.
suicide bombers know that they're going to go get, to heaven and have how many virgins? It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's more than exists probably.
Right.
You know, that reward in heaven creates some really unlikable behaviors in the present, right? What if the reward of heaven is here and now? The grace is all around us always, and it's just a matter of us allowing and stepping into that grace. So, yeah, I'm not anti-religion, but I am anti-projection of certainty. So this idea that we are all beings of light, that that's all there is before we come here. We come to this physical world to get a body, to experience that body as a navigational tool to find and embrace more love. This is the whole human experience, to go from unboundaried existence in a unity field of energy and light, this picture, to this boundaried existence, but still that light is an ever-present part of our expression on this world. And if we're lucky enough, really lucky enough, we meet up with somebody that we get to share our light with and have what I refer to as this conscious intimacy, this place where you can be fully seen by another human, to not hold back any parts of yourselves, to no longer hide your light, but to really fully express. And Stephen is my partner in this dance of conscious intimacy, this place where we're more devoted to the fullest expression of our light and helping each other achieve that than we are about the concept of loyalty. And I want to just spend a moment on this, because loyalty is an important part of our relationship. We don't have an open marriage, don't want an open marriage. But to be so loyal to another human that you stop expressing in your own way is creates a resentment. And so let me back up. So when I went on my trip to Burning Man, and Stephen stayed home and had his 3 nightmares, 3 nights in a row, about she's at the orgy dome, she's doing, his imagination ran wild about what I was going to be doing at Burning Man. Of course, none of that was true. But he spent some time with some of his brothers, and they said, first of all, has Edie ever said or done anything that creates this as a rational concern? No. Okay. So then he had to figure out that it was his projection, his fears that he was, imposing on me in the relationship. And by the time I came home, he had unpacked that enough that he was able to grow into a bigger understanding of what his fears are. He was afraid I was going to leave him. And I said, well, that's the surest way to ensure that outcome, is to continue to project that onto me. On the other hand, if you can trust me that where I am is in expressing myself, but also in relationship with you, then we can navigate this. And so, it put us on a really healthy path to be radically honest with each other at all times about what we want. Still negotiating, still within the boundaries of caring enough about each other not to just be walking all over each other, but giving each other enough space to be able to continue to expand in relationship. A lot of people struggle to fully express themselves in relationship because they're constantly editing. Mare, I know you've had that. Would you be willing to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. As you're talking through all of this, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a close friend a few months ago, and she was asking me what does love mean to you? Mm-hmm. And I was kind of stumped for a second, and I just had never had somebody ask me that point blank before. And she said, "Well, let me tell you what it means to me, or what it used to." She says, "It used to mean never leaving. Used to be love was never leaving me." And she went through a shift where she went from feeling that love was never leaving to love never leaves me. So from love is never leaving me to love never leaves me. Wow. And so I think in terms of the editing that you mentioned, when we're coming at love from the perspective of creating a circumstance where we will never be left or where we will never be hurt, that's where the editing comes in, right? So we step on eggshells, we alter ourselves, we change our behavior, we become more like our partner, we do what people expect of us.
We merge.
We merge.
Yeah.
And we dissolve ourselves in the process. And so that was a huge wake up for me when she told me that. And I thought...
So instead of being afraid of that she's going to be left, she realized that love can never leave her.
That it's a fallacy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That the love that she's received will never go anywhere.
Right.
Even if that person were to go.
Right.
So you can do your best to create that security, but it's an illusion.
Right.
It's an idea. And so I've really worked hard to come to a place where I can receive the love that comes to me without needing to attach to it or hang on to it for the security.
Right.
That I might have, gone after just maybe a few years ago.
Yeah.
But that's the differential to me. It's the difference between how do I make sure love never leaves me,
Right.
to love never leaves.
Yeah.
I can sit right here.
You're sourcing from within.
You're sourcing from within
instead
rather
of
than without.
from outside of yourself.
And it makes it that much easier to accept the love that people are able to give you from a really clean, healthy
And to give without
place.
strings attached,
and
too.
to give without strings attached.
Yeah, that sticky love we talked about, I think,
Right.
in session 2.
Mm-hmm.
That idea of attachments versus true unconditional love.
Yes.
That's the shift right there. So
Mm-hmm.
conscious intimacy is a dance between lovers, a dance between friends, and as it turns out, a dance between humans. It just is. We are in a constant state of intimacy. The question is it conscious or is it unconscious? And so this is my version of trying to illustrate the concept of a big toe here. There you are with your body of truth, your trust in yourself that you are enough, that you are whole as you are, that you don't have to source from outside of you. There you are. And now you're trying to hook up with somebody else. And that instead of that big, beautiful pink heart of connection and overlap with your partner, that ecstatic space that you find yourself in with a consciously intimate partner, it's now a narrow band. There's some intimacy there, but there's not the big expansion because you are still struggling with the big toes that have been imposed into your toe. So if, for example, a child is abused early on, that is where somebody else's theory of the case, their supremacy to impose their will on another human being, has created a lack of trust and safety in your own big toe. And so your light diminishes, it shrinks. You don't feel fully expanded. You feel like there's too much risk to fully expand because somebody else's big toe is stepping on your expression in the world. And so I just want to point out the difference between these ideas, that we're here to learn to embody a physical world, to have boundaries, and yet by imposing our big toe on another, we are overstepping those boundaries. And so these people tend to have no real sense of body of trust within themselves. You can see this sort of disorganized fear bot over here on the far right. It's not a tight circle. It's not balanced. It's not symmetrical. It's not whole. It's fragmented. And so their fear will be fragmented, and their mistrust will be fragmented. And they may navigate through love up to a point, but there's always this underlying distrust of love because of how they were introduced into the world of love. And so you end up in this place of unconscious intimacy. And I think about where my molestation fits that model. The intimacy of having a father overstep my physical boundaries is the textbook definition of unconscious intimacy. He was unconscious in his actions of projecting his theory of the case that it was okay for him to do what he did to me, right? And so unconsciousness shows up as an entitlement, like a supremacy of thought that it doesn't matter how my behavior impacts others. And that is at its core what supremacy looks like. It's unconscious intimacy, because we're in an intimate dance in this human experience, and you either come at it consciously or you end up hurting others with your unconsciousness. And so it's the difference between sourcing our free will from love or fear. It's a boundary overreach, and it is attached to a curse of certainty. There is a rationalization, a justification that has to be made in one's mind to override what our body of truth tells us about the sovereignty of our expression. That, we were just talking today about grandson James and the family, and how a lot of adults don't understand about children's boundaries. They don't honor children's boundaries. Within our own family system, we had a situation where one of the siblings in our household had an overreach from another person, and so we had to have a very important conversation as a family about boundaries. Where do I end? Where do you begin? So that we could teach each other about what that looked like. And with 3 little girls and a little boy, we had a lot of dress-up clothes in the house. And I remember one afternoon I was watching all the girls play, and I think, Mary, you had like a chiffon wedding dress. I remember I'd gone to like Salvation Army and bought a lot of wedding dresses and prom dresses for you girls just to do dress up in, and you had this chiffon thing over you.
As you do.
As you do, of course. And I just got this image of like a bell. Like each of us has a bell around us, an invisible boundary that if we are paying attention and somebody comes into our bell that doesn't belong there, you get this fire drill response, right? Like you can, I wanted to create words and sort of a spectrum of feeling for the kids to understand that they can feel when there's a boundary violation happening. And rather than muffle that in the kids, so we came up with what our family dubbed the bell. And so it was kind of like if somebody was tickling you too much and you'd say, Uncle, I call Uncle. This was our version of Uncle, but it extended not just to physical boundaries, but emotional and psychic boundaries as well. So I remember once I was at the grocery store with Charlie. It was one of those, she was like 3, maybe 4, just, very precocious. And we were going through the store, and this parent was like yelling at another child. And Charlie marched right up to the parent and said, "You're in her bell." And the parent looked at me and said, "What?" And I said, "You are kind of in her bell." Charlie grabbed my hand. "Come on, let's get out of here." And then as you guys got older, that lesson carried over, right? I remember once getting a call from your husband before you were married, and he said, "Okay, Mary says I need to learn about the bell. What's this bell thing, right?"
Yeah, we're not married anymore.
No, we're not married anymore. He wasn't really good at the bell thing. He
Not so good.
Not so good,
Not so
right?
good. Yeah.
This idea that our body of truth has this early warning system where people who have weak boundaries, when they come into your space and begin to project their energy into your energy, you have this reaction, but we have been taught to muffle it. We were just talking about baby James the other day and how he's really good about somebody, coming up to him, and when his cues are pretty obvious. Do you want to?
Yeah, he doesn't know about the bell yet. He's 3.5, but he's very clear when he is done. So his words are all done.
All done.
All done.
Whatever you're doing.
Whatever it is, if it's a toy, all done. If it's you're tickling me too much, all done. And so that became canon in their household. That's now their bell. So if he reaches a point where he's hit a boundary, he knows that he can say at 3 years old, all done.
All done.
And that no matter what, that will be respected. So, if somebody else comes into the house that's not family, it's a thing that we sometimes have to clarify for people because...
just give Grandma a kiss. Come over here, give me a kiss. No, I don't do that with him at all.
No requisite hugs in that house.
No.
If he doesn't want to, he never has to.
Right, right.
And if he wants something to stop, all done. And that's it. That's all you have to say.
So our bodies are not here to service the needs of others. That body of truth, that sovereignty of our physical space, but also our psychic space. 4 kids, 3 girls born in 4 years, you guys were always sort of on each other. And sometimes the violence of our words is a boundary violation. And so there were many times when I'd hear the girls yelling and one would finally say, "Enough, you're in my bell." And that was a non-negotiable statement in our household of setting a firm line of if somebody says bell, it doesn't matter how right you think you are in that moment, whatever entitlement you have to press your point further, it is a statement of absolute boundary that we established in our family. We haven't done a very good job of that in the world at large. And I think part of the reason that became so important to me was because my boundaries had been so violated as a child that my mom would describe me as a toddler who would never sit in somebody's lap. I'd just slide out, like go to grab it, I'd be gone and off and running. I think a lot of my expression as a human has been in response to that violation of boundaries. And so we have, if we think about supremacy at its core is separation, but how it manifests, ironically and paradoxically, is a lack of boundaries. That's kind of how this whole universe operates. It's interesting how close the wound and the healing can happen in the same place. We have to check our big toes and make sure, one, is it sourced from love, and am I imposing my big toe on anybody else? And that's why this healing conversation, I'm so sure that each of you has your own big toe I'm sharing mine out loud because I think I just want to help others really trust their body of truth. Trust that they are their own guru. I read something online yesterday, actually, this woman, she goes, I've been following this spiritual teacher for the last 5 years, and I just can't anymore, and I don't have a practice. I don't have my own sort of spiritual practice, but I can't follow that practice anymore. And it was interesting, the responses she got. I love to just sort of eavesdrop on these conversations. And, you know, a lot of people were like, you know, well, you know, it's you've just got to create a practice for yourself. But she doesn't even know what her own big toe is. She's adopted somebody else's big toe. In all of that following of that guru, she never fully integrated the teachings, but she's just realized that she's full of those teachings. And I just wrote a simple thing back to her. I think I said something along the lines of, it is your turn to figure out what your truth is. And so you're going to probably go explore other teachers, other philosophies. You're a seeker. Nobody's meant to stay with one big toe. It's an evolving, shifting belief system. It doesn't exist in certainty. Our toes are always going to be a conscious response to what's happening around us. And so I on my Facebook page, I have this, it's kind of an interesting, I've fine-tuned my Facebook algorithm to the point where I only get really cool memes. I mean, I just don't even get the stuff that, I guess I've built my own echo chamber, you could call it that, but I get so many beautiful memes, and I was sort of running my own filter against this, and I posted this. I said, you know, those we love don't go away. They walk beside us every day, unseen, unheard, but always near, still loved, still missed, and very dear. Now, it's a sweet little poem, and it's very innocuous. A Christian could post this, a non-Christian could post this, you know, or maybe somebody who believes there's something bigger than us after we die. And I thought, this is a big toe, though. I can't prove that there's people walking. Are there dead people in the room? I don't know for sure. I have a sense that I have a connection with ancestors and other spirits around me, but, you know, am I willing to say that that is got to be your big toe? No. You know, just my big toe has room for everybody to have a love-based big toe. So whenever we see information coming at us, this is the point of this little exercise, is asking ourselves, okay, some people talk about sacred contracts, twin flames, soulmates, karmic partners. That's different than somebody else who might talk about, you know, scriptures in the Bible. You know, we attach to certain, you know, words and explanations for our big toe. Is there any harm to that? Does anything about that concept of spiritual connections impede love? Does it create more separation and division, or does it create perhaps more connection and more understanding? You know, that's my filter now. Is what I'm hearing from another person, from a media source, from a meme, or other expression, does it create separation, division, or does it create connection and offer some love and comfort? And so as I'm sorting and watching the news and what's happening around us, where I'm finding the greatest inconsistency is this merging of certainty with love. Like, the bishop talked about it a little bit, this idea of living today for the reward in heaven. That's a beautiful idea, the idea of heaven, but there's also baked into that a fear that if you don't live a certain way, you're going to hell. So from my perspective, that is a fear-based big toe. And that's why I can't align with it, because it goes against my biology of love that we are wired for. So I just offer that each of us has to be our own compass to figure out and be better consumers of what's coming through for us in the news, in our relationships. If somebody is stepping into your world, are they stepping into your world because they want to bring more love to your world, or are they stepping in because if you don't love the same way they love, there's going to be separation. This one came through. I thought it was pretty fun. I just thought I'd share it. You know, there's this belief I have right now that if I could just get everybody in a room and give them a little bit of cannabis for a few hours, and we could just let the fear and the ego fall away, that we could all find our way back to that center point, to that place where our big toe is contained in love and not stepping into others because we're afraid. If you don't believe what I believe, does that mean my belief isn't valid? No. So theoretically, there'd be no need for me to proselytize, evangelicalize, go out and recruit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we need to recruit people to our big toe?
Certainty.
Because we need the certainty to come from outside of us,
Mm-hmm.
rather than trusting our body of truth as our certainty, right?
It's reminding me of, there have been a lot of experiments like this over the years, but it's a pretty common psychological experiment that they've run over and over and over again, where it's a Good Samaritan kind of thing. Somebody struggling, who's going to stop and help, right? Mm. So they found that people who identify as atheists will stop and help a much larger percentage of the time than people who identify, per se, as Christian. And I think when we align ourselves with a religious body like that, we're abdicating some of our moral responsibility, right? We're handing it over to somebody else, and we're saying, maybe not consciously, but I'm a good person because I am doing these things, and this person over here has told me that I am. And we don't even have to think twice about, do I need to stop and help that person because it's the right thing to do? Maybe. But if you're already feeling really certain about the fact that you're a great person and you're a wonderful human,
right,
because you're doing all these other things,
right,
and somebody else has told you that you are, perhaps it makes it easier to walk past the person who's hurting on the street than it is for somebody who can't or chooses not to abdicate that moral responsibility to a separate body
outside of themselves,
right, and navigates from that central, that central core of themselves, as as far as what's right and what's wrong and how to care for others.
There is a unifying thread in the Golden Rule that I just want to offer a slightly different take on the words. Not what would Jesus do? Not putting it in the Christian context, but what would love do?
Mm-hmm.
Every day, what would love do? How would love show up in this moment? And that's the piece that I really want to offer up in this conversation is we are all exhausted, scared, under threat. Millions are losing their housing, access to food, health care, education, jobs. The recent jobs report, we lost, I think, I forget, 155,000 jobs in the last month, and they were all lost by women.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's telling.
Yeah.
That's something we need to get to the bottom of. That women working is expendable in a time of crisis. These are the conversations we won't have during the pandemic, but it is something that we will want to reflect on when we're out of survival mode, when we can transcend the fear that we're living in right now. And so I love this beautiful illustration. It reminded me of the geometry of our human existence, the sacred geometry. There's a whole science of sacred geometry that talks about the physics of our expression has this this harmonious way that we interact. You know, each of those flowers is a unique point of light that represents each of us. And when we are whole and boundaried, we exist in this grid of light in a way that is different from how we're existing right now, which is in a discordant, chaotic expression. We wouldn't see the synergy in the geometry of what we look like right now on the planet. So I would say that the number one overriding emotion in every healing conversation I've ever had with an individual, when we get to their wounding, and then we go even further, like people who've done a lot of their own healing work, there's still this underlying grit that's grinding on their soul, and it is a collective understanding that we all share, and the word that I put into that understanding is disappointment. That we are reaching a level of shared disappointment in the human expression. So my bonus question tonight was, how much suffering are we willing to tolerate? How much shared grief are we willing to tolerate? And it meets up with this level of disappointment, dissonance that we are existing in. We are coming to that decision point where we are going to have to address this level of angst that we have accepted as our reality and ask different questions about it. Dear human race, we are weary from running the human race. We've run from ourselves, each other, from life, weary to the bone, down on our knees. Please, please, please wake up to see it doesn't have to be this way. We have the power inside us to claim our destiny, to embrace our birthright of divinity. The children are watching. I was born in 1958. I was old enough and present enough to remember when John F. Kennedy was assassinated and when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I remember watching my mom weeping. And I'd never seen her respond like that to anything, ever. And I sat there and watched her and asked questions, and she explained about racism and about, that John F. Kennedy represented a new energy, a new life, a healing leader that wanted to bring us together, that understood the pain and suffering of the human condition could be met with policy and communal well-being, and there was so much hope, and maybe too much hope, placed in the mantle of his beingness on this planet. And when he was assassinated, hope was assassinated. And the same thing with Martin Luther King. Hope was assassinated. And right now I feel like what I witnessed was hope being assassinated. Like somehow, some way, that hope has to be trusted. We have to trust our body of knowing, our body of truth. That hunger, that unmet disappointment that we're feeling is a gift, is an input that is designed by its very nature to stir the cauldron of our wounding, to ask bigger questions. The article I shared a couple weeks ago about depression is a gift, if we are wise enough to see it that way, that it is the manifestation of our disappointment with the human experience. And that when we look at depression not as a pathology, but as a messenger, we begin to listen to it and ask different questions about why are we so sad? Why are we so disappointed in the human experience? Across this planet, it doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum. I'll bring my boomerang, whether you're on the far right or the far left of the spectrum, the certainty of one set of beliefs or the certainty of another set of beliefs, hanging on to that certainty, our addiction to that certainty is making this shifting time, this tumultuous shifting time, hard to hang on to reality right now. When I first got this concept of the boomerang handed to me on election night, it was a big download about the way forward is to be in the center, to hang on, ground in your internal body of truth, and not get caught up out here in the big toe, the beliefs, and stay with the ones that are based in love, but let go of the ones that are based in fear, or you will feel the full gyrational torque of shift in a way that will either lay you out in a sacred quest to heal, or you will externalize it and project that discomfort onto others. When you seek to find someone to blame for the existential disappointment that you feel, you are externalizing your fear. You are projecting it out into the world. When you seek to understand that existential disappointment, you are internalizing it. You're taking responsibility for it. One of the things in the book we're reading right now, Stephen and I, in our morning practice, is the quest for eternal sunshine. The storyteller in this story talks about how he just resigned himself to his sadness. For many, many years, he just operated beyond his sadness. He went along to get along. He was in love. He had a beautiful family, but he was never whole within himself, and he just came to accept half a life. We are living half a life right now. We are living a life that some would argue may not be worth living. And yet, if we can wake up to this moment, to understand that the pathology that is manifesting as dis-ease and ill-ease with each other on this planet was planted many, many years ago. This is I love the idea of the regenerative ag model because it starts with the quality of soil that we grow our food in. It is, you can have the best seed in the world and the best exposure, but if you have no nutrients in the soil, we have not bothered to regenerate the soil of our story. We are still trying to source from a soil that has been abused and untended for thousands of years. And so we're bearing very little fruit with each other now. We have so much scarcity because our roots are in contaminated soil, contaminated by fear, contaminated by a history of fear that we aren't even bringing into the conversation. We're so caught up in the moment of who's right and who's wrong. We've got to take this massive step backwards and ask ourselves, what kind of world do we want to live in? What would we consent to? This is the age of consent, which is the age of co-creation. If this is not the world we want to live in, we have it within our divine ability, co-creative imaginations, to design a world where we want to be here, where we would want to consent, where we wouldn't live half a life, where we wouldn't accept that disappointment is the human condition. So, life begins and ends with breath. It is the intention with which we breathe each breath in between that creates the heaven or hell of our existence. The entitlement of ideologies over the acceptance of our oneness. This is the the struggle that we in rugged individualism versus communal well-being. And the irony is, and I mentioned this earlier, is when I talk to people who have a different big toe, or I perceive a different big toe than mine, and I ask them not who they voted for, but what they voted for, I can always meet them. It's amazing to me how this boomerang, we're not so far apart. It's just a few little adjustments along the way, and now we're meeting in the middle. You get to have your big toe, I get to have my big toe, but what we have in common is that we want to live in a world where we feel safe and free to fully express. And we can only do that when we express within the balance of the greater good. And so this is, as I look at the virus, it is really shaking up our concept of greater good. We're about to hit a level of expansion of the virus that I don't think anybody thought we would reach, that there's no way in hell that we would allow ourselves to be so unwilling to do the right thing for each other. I just don't think anybody thought we'd get this far. I certainly didn't. I remember when I was making masks last spring, they were talking about a death toll of maybe 50 or 60,000 people. And then within a week, they bumped it to 90 or 100,000. And now what are we up to? Almost 400,000? And we haven't hit our peak yet. At some point, our shared grief and disappointment for the human condition will become the unifying theme. It will override all of the beliefs that we have about supremacy, our ideological supremacy that we carry. And so the question is, how do we navigate between now and then? How do we hold on to our body of truth in a way that keeps us fed from within? As your friend said, love is here, it's not out there. It's always here. Connection is what we seek. Love is always here, right? So let's have a moment of love and connection and breathe this in and just ask ourselves, if we could wave a magic wand and really manifest a world we weren't disappointed in, and then take a breath each day toward that potentiality. Imagine millions of people taking that breath together across this planet. Not asking you to agree with me or me to agree with you. We just accept that we're going to have some dissonance for a while. We're going to have some places where we have edges that don't match up with each other, but to remember that we love each other, that we're here to learn to love each other. It's a simple idea, but the cure for supremacy is connection. And right now, the ideological disparity, the intractable polarization that we're experiencing cannot be met with words. It just can't. We have to get back into our bodies and breathe like our first breath and our last, that this is that important, that we get this right, that we show up from a place of love, that our big toe, every step we take, is tender and gentle with others around us, to show up from that place of kindness and acceptance and taking a breath together whenever we feel like, we're about to react. No, consciously respond. Take this moment of breath together as our cue to recenter in that source code of love. And our bodies are 60% water, and each breath that we take with a 528 hertz vibration around us is resetting that field of water within our bodies to that vibration of love. And the more we do that, we source our free will from love. We show up with patience and acceptance and allowance for the disappointment that we're all experiencing right now. That is our unifying thread, our shared disappointment in the human experience. And what's got to happen is we got to quit blaming each other for it. It's not a function of what you do that makes my life miserable. It's a function of how I respond to what's happening that makes my life either the hell or heaven of my existence. So the way forward is moving away from knowing it all, which is that curse of certainty, to knowing nothing at all, except that we are love and we are here to learn how to do it right, to create that unified field of love in physical form. We knew it wasn't going to be easy. We knew we were giving it a degree of difficulty. If we go back to the concept of a video game of life, you know, you arrive, you don't know who you are, you don't know what your superpowers are. You've got to play the game to learn the superpowers, and you fall in the dungeon and you have the experiences, but little by little you start experimenting with who you are, and you learn that you do have superpowers in this human story, and you supercharge all your superpowers when you source from love. So we don't have to know all the answers about how we're going to get through this dissonance and this disappointment, this shared disappointment that we all feel in our own expression out there right now. If we can let go of why we're disappointed and begin to breathe in hope that we can navigate our way out of that disappointment. Just hope, just a breath of hope. Just let each breath be a prayer, a simple, quiet prayer, not to something outside of ourselves, but something that is inside of ourselves, that we, going back to we'd like to, we believe it's possible. If we can just hold on to those two ideas, that we'd like to live in harmony and we believe it's possible to live in harmony. Breathing that in multiple times a day, whenever you slow down, just remembering that you're not breathing alone. Right now I've got dozens of people breathing with me, and I just feel every time I saw you breathing with me today, John Wayne, and I looked down and went, do you get that feeling too, that sort of little jolt?
I have to stick on my glasses just to see who's breathing with me.
Who's breathing
I was
with
like,
me?
someone's breathing. It's blurry, but yes.
Yes, I'm not alone, right? Or I haven't met this person who's now breathing with me, but I have a thread of connection to them. And her big toe might be different from my big toe, but we're breathing together, and all of a sudden the focus is on birthing a new reality with each other, and not what your big toe is and how it's different from mine. This supremacy being the opposite of harmony is something that's going to take us a while to unpack. But until we get it unpacked, we can at least breathe together toward that potentiality. So that's what my thoughts are on healing supremacy, that we just really have to see it as the antithesis of harmony. And as long as we refuse, because of our curse of certainty, we will continue to be in a world of discord and dissonance and disappointment. And so you do your part, show up every day sourcing your free will from love, navigating the twists and turns of a very chaotic world from love, showing up with kindness for yourself and others, because we are doing the best we can. our tempers are going to be right at the edge. Our addictions are off the chart right now. People are drinking and smoking and doing things that, the numb shit, dumb shit stuff on the spectrum, because we are so uncomfortable with this disappointment, so uncomfortable with this dissonance, so much pain that has been stored in these bodies for thousands of years are coming to the surface. The rage, the grief, the primal scream. I wish we could just go into a big open field and scream together. Just scream that place where you think it could never end and that your lungs and your throat are going to burn out before the expression is complete. We may have to do it for a few years, but we are carrying the grief of our parents, and their parents, and all of the epigenetic damage to our DNA that we're carrying into this moment. We have to be conscious to this, not reactive to it. So my prayer for all of us as we move forward in the coming weeks and we see our dissonance on full display, that remember that beneath that dissonance is a disappointment, a shared disappointment. And that our attachment to our ideas that keep us locked into the dissonance will keep us from getting to the core of that disappointment. And so eventually we will reach a point, and I passed this long ago, and others will reach it in their own time, where the pain of changing is more desirable than the pain of staying the same. That's the inflection point that we're moving towards. That's the moment where we finally say, this isn't working. Nobody's ever going to surrender their ideology. So how do we come together? And it is in our shared disappointment that we'd be willing to sit down and have a different kind of conversation with each other. You keeping your big toe in check, I'll keep my big toe in check. I'm not going to try and legislate my big toe into your world. I'm going to ask you to honor the golden rule and not legislate your big toe into my world. That no one idea has supremacy over any other unless it's sourced in love. Love is the only supremacy that we should be nourishing and nurturing, not fear-based ideas. So where we go from here is to be determined. Because of COVID, because of the numbers in Monterey right now, California, I'm putting a little bit of a halt on the Healing Conversation series until such time I feel like everybody who comes into this space can do so safely. They say even right now going to the grocery store is high risk, so I wouldn't want to put anybody else at risk for this reason. So for now, the Healing Conversation is going on hold, but the conversation can continue through our Facebook page is the primary source. John Wayne and I are putting together some new forums, places where we can begin to gather around these teachings and really begin to go deep and intimate with people on their take on their big toes. And if there's one takeaway I would hope that all of this has brought forward is the need to examine our big toes. Does your theory of everything line up with fear? Does it create more separation and division? And if it does, you will be perpetually locked into a state of disappointment for the human condition. And you'll know when you have reached that tipping point where the cost emotionally, psychically, identity, ego-wise, of staying the same is not worth it anymore. So those are my thoughts, John Wayne. What are your thoughts?
Thought that was great. This was good stuff. The biggest thing that I really enjoyed about tonight was your definition around supremacy. And so supremacy as a word to me, it's not a word that I use. It's got a sting to it. And so when you use the word separation, it's like, oh, click. I got it.
It's externalized separation. It's projection
Yeah.
of fear. So supremacy is certainty of your ideas.
Mhm.
That keeps you safe, right?
Yeah.
It's a trauma response. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have so much compassion for everyone. Wherever you sit on the boomerang, wherever you are, everybody's feeling. And this is the uniting theme. We're all feeling it.
Mm.
And
Yeah, I think one of the big things at the beginning of the night when you started talking about, what was it? What is our tolerance for collective grief? And if I go back 3 conversations ago, when we began the healing conversation, and you asked, are you ready for the healing conversation? What came to my mind was, well, the world seems kind of crazy right now, but it's still, I still feel people are numbed out. They're numbed out to the numbers of people that are dying. They're numbed out to the politics of their world. They're numbed out just to everyday Netflix entertainment, people dying, people being killed.
yeah,
And so is this real?
right.
Right? And so this whole political landscape is seen like a big TV show,
Mm-hmm.
entertaining, right? And so what's our tolerance level? I was thinking, well, are people actually really feeling? Well, there's a segment of the population that's super angry. They're feeling. And so I feel like now, just in this past week, people are really starting to feel. And there's this line that's being drawn. And that line keeps getting deeper and deeper. And it's creating this giant crevice on each side, like this big hill.
Yeah.
And so that's the pause that I've been feeling this week.
Yeah.
Is when does this hill start to fall?
Yeah. Yeah. As you were describing that, I had this parallel image of the virus. And I've been tracking sort of, for months, people say, does anybody know anybody who's died of COVID? On Facebook, there's this,
Yeah.
and then, no, not yet. And so there's this perpetuation of,
Does it exist?
does it exist, right? The hoax concept. But now, just this week, I saw somebody post, does anybody know anybody? And like 40 people responded. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And many had an intimate relative, friend that they'd lost or who was struggling with long haul COVID. I just don't know how much longer we can stay numb to it.
Yeah.
I just, suicides are up, addiction rates are up, child abuse, spousal abuse, violence. At some point, we are reaching a collapse of our old construct. It's not working for us.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate to the new story? How do we heal the old story? And when we talked about going to school on our wounding, it was the way forward is to look back with the lens of love, to hold it through that lens of compassion for the unconsciousness that we were. We were all doing the best we could with where we arrived in the setting of our story, with the wounding and the genetic carryover, the hangover of grief and trauma, the imprinting that has come to each of us in our story. But now we know better, we can do better, right? How about you, Mary? Anything jumping out at you tonight?
I think I spoke out in the moment when things did, but one of the things that kept coming up for me was how grateful I am to have grown up in a large family context. And the reason for that is that big families fight. Ours did, anyway. I'm sure they don't all, but when you have kids that are very close together, they have moments of lots of animosity with each other. And
Intensity.
So lots of intensity,
Yeah.
yeah. And so what that created for me, though, was this this family culture where it was okay to fully express and know that your family would still be there on the other side of it. You could be met in that. Even if it was messy, even if it was angry, even if it was real ugly for a period of time, you knew that core foundation of love was always there and underneath it all. And so it made everything else manageable and comfortable. Even those moments where you were sure that there was no way that you could ever find agreement again and that you just wanted to kill each other.
Yeah.
That love was always there and would always keep us in this place of knowing that no matter what hurtful things were said or done, it's tough to give people the benefit of the doubt unless you know that that core of care is there with each other.
Yeah.
So I've had other relationships where that wasn't the case, where people grew up in small families or without siblings, and there's a difference, you know, that there's a difference between being in a context where you can be as big and as loud and whatever you need to be to fully move through those feelings and be met in that space, and then being in a context with somebody who doesn't know how to operate that way, it can be really overwhelming. So, you know, I don't know how we get there, but it's getting back to the harmony that you keep talking about. It's that harmony that really wants desperately to be there. Those notes want to match up.
Yeah.
They don't like being in dissonance with each other.
Yeah.
And so when we get back to that place of remembering that we are all brothers and sisters, it'll make it much easier to deal with all of this mess. But I'm just continuously grateful as we move through tonight for having grown up in a context like that, because it, I think it makes it easier for me to wade through the mess.
So what you're describing is you're saying, and I get the sense that your body of trust, your body of truth, was expansive to your family unit. You felt like you could trust the body, the collective body of your family,
Right.
to express, right? And when we come into situations where we don't have that body of shared trust, which is what we're experiencing across our civilization right now, it makes it hard to feel like you can fully express. And so a lot of the anger and resentment and disappointment is people don't feel like they're expressing, that they're going along to get along, that they're repressed. The oppression and repression that we project as somebody doing it to us is really something that we've come to accept in our own lives. You know, how much longer will we tolerate our own dissonance? Not just the collective dissonance. It's all coming to a head. You can see the energy of individual expression coming up against communal well-being, and communal well-being coming up against the expression of individual rugged, expression. So it's the dance of boundaries. And it is within us to divinely create a world where we can reconcile that balance between you get to fully express, and I want to create a world where that's possible, because when you're in your full-bodied light, I can chill. I know that you're not going to hurt me because I'm in my full-bodied light too. This freedom comes when we are all free to fully express. And we can't do that if we are putting our big toe into each other's worlds.
Trees do it so well. Have you seen those images of tree canopies?
Yeah.
And the way that they match right up with each other, right to the inch.
But give room.
But give room. And yet share resources
Right.
under the ground.
Yeah.
And communicate as a unit.
So we need to have the sight to see the canopy. And the sense to look at the roots of our story and see that we come from the same roots, and that our potentiality is to share the canopy of expression. And right now, we're just in the jungle to figure that out. So thank you for riding along with me, you guys, and doing this healing conversation. It's just my theory of everything, and I hope it helps to inform yours and give you the curiosity to go deeper on your own story, to find where fear is an impediment to your own expression and unpack it through the lens of love, that you can truly answer question number 4 with a big hell yes. Do you love yourself enough to heal? Because if you can do that, then you can breathe into the potentiality that we collectively can have a big hell yes on that. Do we love ourselves enough to heal? May it be so. May it be love. Aho.
Oh.
Mhm.